Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be discussing with you how I got into collecting Transformers figures, as well as some of my favourite childhood Transformers. Now in this video, I shall be talking about each of the Transformers movie toy lines. So the first movie, the second movie, the Hunt for the Decepticons toy line, Dark of the Moon, Age of Extinction, and The Last Night. I won't be delving into any of the Takara exclusives, nor the Studio Series, as the Studio Series is a relatively new line, and I haven't really resonated and haven't got as many memories with these figures as I have with some of the previous movie figures, so these will be crossed off the list. The reasoning behind why you have the first team of Transformers movie Autobots in front of you is because these were the Transformers that I grew up with. The Bayverse was my version of G1 and was my introduction into the amazing Transformers. This version of Optimus Prime, as well as Bumblebee being a Camaro, these were the characters that I resonated with the most, and these were the versions that I grew up with as a child. Now before I begin this video, I think it's probably best that I say that I never actually grew up watching the entire Transformers movie. I did actually miss the first movie as well as the second movie, and it wasn't until the third movie, where my friend actually invited me along to the cinema, that I actually really got into the Transformers movies. I remember watching it and was absolutely blown away by Shockwave, Optimus Prime with the jetpack, Bumblebee in that movie was superb, and just some of the action scenes were absolutely phenomenal. Sentinel Prime was the best villain in my opinion that I'd ever seen in the cinema, and as a young boy it was really mesmerising to see these fantastic looking trucks and vehicles, aircrafts, all converting into these giant, very realistic looking robots. As soon as that movie finished, I ran out and actually bought my second figure, as believe it or not, I had almost an introduction to Transformers during the Revenge of the Fallen toy line, as I actually got my first Transformer during that, which was actually a deluxe class Bumblebee. However, I didn't pick up any of the other figures from that line. I was merely going for a phase of just cool robots that could turn into cars. After the Dark of the Moon movie finished, however, and I'd finished watching it, I rushed out and bought the first figure that actually got me into collecting, that being the Dark of the Moon leader class Bumblebee. After that, it was a steady hill down into collecting, and I began rapidly picking up all of the figures that I'd missed from the first movie, the second movie, as well as trying my best to complete the third movie toy line. I had literally just bought so many Transformers that year, it was unbelievable. So in this video, you will be seeing some figures which are, in my opinion, the best out of that specific movie wave, as well as some figures that resonate with me the most due to nostalgia and childhood memories. So without further ado, let's wrap this up and get on to my top picks for the first movie Transformers toy line. Kicking things off with the first live action Transformers movie, here are my top 3 figures from that specific toy line. Now you may all be wondering, why are they all in the leader class assortment? And that's mainly because as of the time of Dark of the Moon, there were already superior figures that had come out that greatly improved upon these individual figures besides Brawl, and I wasn't necessarily too much of a fan back then of some of the other characters such as Bone Crusher and Jazz, etc., as those characters at that point had been killed off in the movies, and seeing as I was only fairly young, I was only really interested in collecting the characters that were still alive and that were still predominant within the films. Of course, a few years later I sure corrected that and did actually pick up loads more 2007 Transformers movie figures, but these are the ones that I had growing up as a kid, and these were the ones that I absolutely adored. The leader class Brawl, I think, out of the 3 has got to be my favourite. I still even mess around with this figure to this day and swear that this is better than the Studio Series version despite its inaccuracies. I absolutely love this figure. The movie lines used to only pick up some of the main characters such as Optimus, Megatron, Jetfire in the leader class assortment, so to have a rather obscure character such as Brawl in the leader class line really was fantastic. It was great to have a different Decepticon that towered over your other Deluxes and Voyagers. I used to love pressing the cannon, which unfortunately has now since broke. This mechanism that makes it actually light up and fire doesn't work anymore. However, the automorph gimmick where you can actually activate all the lights and sounds and the cannons still work, I used to love doing that. I loved all the missiles, the Gatling guns that he had, as well as the machine gun, all these different claws that could come out from his feet. I just thought was fantastic. This has definitely got to be my favourite Transformers movie leader class figure from the 2007 movie. Moving on to the Nightwatch Optimus Prime, you may be wondering as to why I don't have the original 2007 colour variation, and that's simply because I believe at around the time I was recollecting the first movie, I already had the Revenge of the Fallen leader class Optimus, so in my mind it wasn't really fitting to go back and buy the same colour variation as a mould that was already superior. So in my mind, I thought if I bought the Nightwatch version, it could act as almost a Nemesis Prime, and it looked different enough from my actual Revenge of the Fallen leader Prime, so I could have these two on the shelf side by side and wouldn't feel as if though I was double dipping. Of course, later on in the years, I have bought so many different versions of this mould in all of the different colour variations. However, this was the first version that I picked up of the 2007 leader, and I've got to say it's held up incredibly well. This figure is what, now 12, 13 years old, and it looks fantastic. All the plastic is really well done. You can transform this figure multiple times and you don't feel like you're going to break anything. The automorph gimmick was amazing. I don't necessarily think that it still works, but we'll just quickly give it a go. You just have to push that, and then the lights and sounds would be showcased within the truck windows, and the eyes would light up as well as the sound effects. I probably don't have the batteries in him at the moment, or they've just died, but it was a really cool feature, and it was awesome that I could actually have an Optimus Prime with an ion blaster, as the original ROTF figure never came with a blaster, and that was something that annoyed me so much as a child, as I always had to have Optimus using his swords to fight against the Decepticons, and could never have him wielding a gun. So that was another reason why I believe I picked this figure up. As stated, it was many, many years ago now, so my memory of picking this figure up is rather vague. I believe all of these were probably sourced on eBay, as around about 2011, all the ROTF and first movie lines had since dried up. But moving very swiftly on to the movie 1 Megatron, this is actually a figure that I got rather recently. I think it's the most recent out of all of these. I picked this one up around about 2014, and it was merely just to fill out the Megatron leader ranks. I wanted to try and complete all of the first movie figures, as well as have all versions of Megatron, and I've got to say that this is still one of the better 2007 figures to come out of that wave. I think it's rather movie accurate. Of course, nothing compared to what we got with the Studio Series and the Masterpiece, but when you actually compare it for its time, it really is well done. The only thing I didn't really like about it was the whole automorph gimmick of the spikes springing out and then him making a rather dinosaur-esque sound effect, and I didn't like this almost bluish tint that he had throughout him, which I think was supposed to evoke the sense of him actually being frozen within the ice. However, another reason why I actually preferred this figure was that it had better proportions and was more articulated than the Revenge of the Fallen leader Megatron. However, personally for me, I've always preferred the Revenge of the Fallen design, so this never quite beat that, but in terms of an overall look, it definitely does look a lot more proportionate when looking at it through a reviewer's perspective and not through the eyes of a child. I did have a full figure that I actually wanted to incorporate within this list, and that was the deluxe class Scorponok, as I absolutely loved that figure as well. However, I cannot for the life of me find him, but that figure should be on the list, and that was also a really nice figure, very accurate for its day, really durable plastic, a very substantial size, and it had probably one of the best automorph gimmicks of all time. So without further ado, let's swiftly move on to the Transformers Revenge of the Fallen picks. Oh boy, was this a tough pick to choose. There are so many amazing Revenge of the Fallen figures, in some eyes as well as perhaps even mine. That is the best line for movie figures of all time. They were incredibly well detailed, incredibly well sculpted, the transformations were rather complex and very involved, and the figures looked remarkable, and they were all at a reasonable price point as well. Of course, as years later followed, the figures got considerably smaller, less complex, and a little bit more expensive. However, I think that they've begun to correct their mistakes with the Studio Series in actually bringing the level of complexity back up. But here are my top 4 picks for the second movie. Skids and Mudflap from the Human Alliance line, in my opinion, one of the best movie lines of all time. The Human Alliance line gave us almost masterpiece quality figures that incorporated miniature figures from the actual movie, such as Sam Witwicky, Michaela Baines, and even the famous Agent Simmons, and actually enabled you to interact them in their robot modes and actually place them in their vehicle modes to make them look as if though they could drive the vehicles. Skids and Mudflap, despite what others may say, these were standout characters for me from the Revenge of the Fallen film. I absolutely loved their personalities. I thought they were really entertaining, very fun characters, juxtaposed a lot of what we got with some of the other movie characters, which were rather generic and didn't really have much personality. I thought that these two definitely broke the mold and were two of the best characters to come out of the entire 5 Michael Bay movies. I really loved their personalities, I loved their interactions, I thought their voice actors were fantastic, and I also quite liked their vehicle modes as well. They're rather small in comparison to some of the other Transformers, but in my opinion, just a great set of characters, and a pair of characters that I actually hope the Studio Series pick up. Back to the actual figures themselves now. These are fantastic. The detail on these is remarkable. As stated, I actually think these are almost masterpiece grade. They came with missiles. This one here actually had where you could pull out this ribbon here and you could have him swing from Devastator, which was awesome. They all had this gimmick where you could make the mouth open. This one's slightly stiffer. However, I do think Skids' one still works. You could make the mouth open to make it look as if though they could talk. They were decked out with loads of articulation, so loads of play value in them as well. Transformation was rather complex complex. However, for someone who actually prefers complex transformations, these were a delight to actually transform. So overall, just really nice figures. Moving on now to the leader class ROTF Megatron. As stated, despite the original version actually being more proportionate in terms of actually reviewing it, this figure I loved. I still think even to this day that this could be my favourite Megatron figure of all time, and I know that there'll be many of you screaming it's so disproportionate, it's so unarticulated, it's not as accurate as it could have been, and I do completely understand where you come from, but for me, this was the first ever Megatron figure I ever owned, and I absolutely loved posing him next to my Revenge of the Fallen Optimus Prime. I think that they paired fantastically. I'm just a massive fan of the Revenge of the Fallen Megatron design in general. That is probably my favourite Megatron design of all time, although the Dark of the Moon one may be slowly creeping up into that place. But as for now, I love the ROTF Megatron design. I thought he was great in the second movie, or at least from what we saw of him in the second film. And I think his transformation was quite fun as well. It's not as complex as the ROTF Leader Prime. However, it's still involved enough so that it doesn't bore you, and you can get the conversion done in a rather short amount of time from robot mode to tank mode. A great looking figure, had an awesome Mecha Live gimmick where if you pulled the lever down in his torso, all the gears would rotate and he would shout out his name. Really well done. And then of course, moving on to the fourth figure, which is ironically the Transformers Devastator. I have recently taken a look at the Studio Series version, which is a vast improvement, but there's no taking away from the fact that I had so much fun with this figure when I was able to pick it up. As stated, the majority of these were collected 2011 and 2012, and this was just one that I could not stop playing with. I loved the gimmick where you could open the mouth and the LEDs and the lights and sounds would make it look as if though he was sucking everything up. I thought it was quite cool how you could separate the limbs into individual vehicles, whilst I did lust over actually getting robot modes in these. Of course, later down the line we did get that corrected, but just such a nice looking figure, really imposing, looks a lot bigger than your other Transformers on the shelf, and although it may not be the most accurate looking figure in the world and it may not have the most articulation, it was definitely very enjoyable to mess around with. And as I stated, opening his mouth and vacuuming up all the Autobots made for many days of playing with them. Turning now to the subline of Revenge of the Fallen, that being the Hunt for the Decepticons toy line. Once again, this is a rather relatively new line that I've recently picked up. Jazz and Starscream I've had for many years, probably since 2011, whereas the Hunt for the Decepticons Fallen as well as the Voyager Optimus Prime are rather new purchases that I've only really just recently acquired. However, I had to put them on the list as out of the whole Hunt for the Decepticons toy line, these four here are major standouts. Jazz, for many years, and probably still is, my favourite Transformer figure of all time. Despite him now being rather inaccurate when compared next to the superior movie masterpiece Jazz, I absolutely played with this figure so many times. It looks fantastic. The paint deco, the missile launcher, the fact that you could actually flip the visor up and down, the minifigure that also came with him. He is once again a Human Alliance figure, and as stated in the ROTF segment, that was a line that I absolutely loved. So to get him in that line was really nice, and he was probably one of the best figures to come out of the Human Alliance line, and probably is the best figure out of the entire Hunt for the Decepticons assortment, in my personal opinion. I played around with this figure for many years, and even to this day still find myself picking him up and transforming back and forth from his vehicle mode. This was the first ever version of Jazz that I ever picked up, and for a long time, I believe actually up until the Studio Series figure came out, was the only Jazz I had in the collection. I never had the first movie deluxe Jazz or any of the other repaints, so I definitely think Hasbro struck gold with this one. Moving on to the Hunt for the Decepticons Voyager Optimus, there really isn't much I can say about this other than it's amazing. You can just see from taking a look at it here that it is just so faithful to the movie. They took the ROTF Leader Prime engineering and downgraded it and simplified it ever so slightly and compressed it into a Voyager class figure, and it looks remarkable. This was great for those who wanted a slightly less expensive Optimus Prime but still had that fantastic engineering, and in some ways it was actually slightly better, as you could actually remove the blades. He had the matrix of leadership, and the gas canisters actually converted into blasters. So a really awesome figure and great play value, as stated previously, with a really complex transformation for a Voyager class. As we move on to the Hunt for the Decepticons The Fallen, this too is also another great figure. The body for the Fallen is just a direct reuse from the original ROTF version. However, they remolded the head in order to make it look more movie accurate, and actually gave him the ability where you could actually remove his face to actually show the endoskeleton that we see when Optimus Prime deals the fatal blow to him in the movie. This version also had upgraded hand so that it could in fact include a staff accessory that it could hold. So in my opinion, this is the definitive version of the Fallen. Of course, I do hope that the Studio Series give us a version of him in the near future as well. But as for now, I'm more than suffice with keeping this in my collection as one of the best figures to come out of the Hunt for the Decepticons line. And then of course, moving on to the iconic Leader Class Hunt for the Decepticons Starscream. This figure was so good that Takara Tomy actually even picked this up a couple of years later, gave it a Movie 1 paint scheme, and even labelled this a movie masterpiece figure. This was amazing. This was such a nicely done figure, incredibly accurate to the movie, came with an exceptional amount of articulation. The accessories were fantastic. The gimmick of where you could actually pull the chest, and the chest as well as the head would light up and he would state various phrases was incredible. He also had a really complex transformation as well, which resulted in a very movie accurate F-22 Raptor alt form. Just all round a fantastic figure, and it's probably one of my top 10 figures out of my entire collection. Turning now to my top 4 picks for the Transformers Dark of the Moon toy line. As stated previously, this is where things really kick-started and got going for me in regards to my Transformers collection. I have so many fond memories with many of the Transformers Dark of the Moon movie figures. However, as I'm only giving 4 spots per movie, these were the figures that stood out to me the most. Of course, Voyager class Shockwave had to be on the list. If you have followed this channel extensively, you'll know that every time I talk about Shockwave, I am just so fond of the character, and that's mainly all down to the Transformers Dark of the Moon movie. Now, despite him, of course, not getting much screen time within the film, all of the scenes that I thought he was in really stood out to me, as he was just such an awesome looking design. I'd never seen a Cyclops Transformer before, and he had that huge driller, which was just amazing and made for some phenomenal action scenes within the film. And then as I began to research more into the character of Shockwave after I had watched the film, I began very quickly falling in love with both the design and the Decepticon himself. My love for the character further began to accentuate when I actually played the Transformers 3 Dark of the Moon video game, as I thought he was fantastic within that game as well, a worthy opponent against Optimus Prime, and my only criticism with him was that I wish we saw more of him within the film. Talking about the actual figure himself though, for a 2011 Voyager class, I think Hasbro did a phenomenal job with this. Even to this day, this stands to be one of the best Transformers Voyager figures to come out of the entire 5 Michael Bay movies. I think he looks really, really intimidating. Of course, not as accurate as the more recently released Studio Series Shockwave, but just such an awesome looking figure. The Cyclops eye that had the light piping, the incredible mechanical detailing that you can see throughout the figure, as well as the Mecha Live gimmick in the actual arm itself, where you can extend the cannon. He did also come with a blade, however, I do seem to have perhaps misplaced it. Perhaps I did put it on my Studio Series version, I cannot see that for now. But just a really nice looking figure, and was for a long time one of my favourite Voyager Decepticons of all time. Moving swiftly on now to the leader classes, here we have leader class Ironhide. Now this figure for many years was my favourite leader class figure of all time. I absolutely loved Ironhide within the 3 Transformers movies. I think he's probably my favourite Autobot character of all time, and up until this figure there was really never any good toys of him. This was the first time I thought Ironhide was to scale with the rest of the Transformers, was as accurate as could be, and the transformation was actually quite fun and enjoyable. But not only that, this figure was loaded with different features. My favourite feature of all time was that when you push down on this, you got this awesome Gatling gun that would spin, and his eyes as well as the cannon inside would pulsate, and it was just such an awesome feature. Of course, he has a normal electronic lights and sounds to make him speak. He had the flip out cannons. He's got hidden cavities within his actual legs as well, so you have a missile here, and in the other one I believe he has a small dagger. Just a superb figure, really nice representation of Ironhide, and was just such a well done and worthy leader class. Moving on to the next leader class, here we have Sentinel Prime. He of course was picked up after I watched the Dark of the Moon movie. Now there is actually a slight backstory to how I actually got this figure. I remember after I'd picked up the leader class Ironhide and Bumblebee, I was at that point only really collecting the big figures from the line. I looked for Sentinel Prime everywhere. I remember I used to get up each morning, and here in the UK we have a store called Argos. That was really the nearest retailer to me that sold Transformers at the time, and I used to go there every single morning, and it had a catalogue where you had one number for 3 figures, so that you would type the number in and it would say that they had 4 in stock. However, that could have been 4 of Ironhide, or it could have been 2 of Bumblebee and 1 each of Ironhide and Sentinel. I used to go there every morning for about 2 months, typing in this code, and every single time all they would bring down was an Ironhide or a Bumblebee. They never ever brought down a Sentinel Prime, and even to this day I cannot remember as to why he was so rare. However, one day my luck changed and my dad actually managed to find one, and I was just absolutely besotted with it. This was an amazing figure, one of my favourite characters to come out of the film, and in my personal opinion, one of the best villains we'd ever had out of the entire Transformers films. We move on now to the Ultimate Optimus Prime, a figure that I believe is cursed amongst many of you as being one of the worst figures, but in my opinion, this was amazing. This was actually my first ever Optimus Prime. So this figure in itself already holds a very special place in my collection, and I have never put it into storage and probably won't ever. It came with this awesome mech tech cannon that I used to have him blast away the Decepticons with. He was the first movie Prime to ever come with an actual trailer that transformed into this Jetwing pack. Just all round, despite it not being the most accurate version of Optimus, this for me for a long time was the best Optimus and was one of my favourite figures that I had back in 2011 and 2012. Turning now to the Transformers Age of Extinction toy line, here are my top 4 picks for that specific movie. Personally for me, Age of Extinction had some of the worst Transformers, and in my opinion had the worst toy line out of all of the 5 Michael Bay films. However, each of these figures here I think are really well done. The Invasion Mode Optimus Prime still to this day is a really nice looking figure. It took the Michael Bay movie design and gave him a vehicle mode that was inspired by the Generation 1 design. He has one of the more complex and interesting transformations as well out of the entire Age of Extinction toy line, which is super cool, and he was just such a fun figure to pose around and play with. Really nice figure, so the Invasion Mode Prime was definitely a top pick out of the AOE toy line. Age of Extinction Voyager Hound. Now this figure may not be the most accurate, specifically in his robot mode, but he is just so playable. This figure was decked out with I believe 8 or 9 accessories, allowing you to really armour this character up and have him fight amongst many of the other Decepticons. He also had an awesome looking Oshkosh Tactical Defense alt form, which I have him displayed in now. I do believe that this is the Platinum Edition, so it does have the camo paint apps on it, but just a really nice looking figure. Very simplistic to transform as well, which I think further aided its play value. And then we move very quickly on to the Dinobots, Grimlock and Scorn. Personally for me, these were the standout Dinobots out of Age of Extinction. Grimlock and Scorn appeared to have the most screen time out of all of them, and out of all of the figures that we got in AOE, these were the best Voyager and Deluxes. The Grimlock was really well done and destroyed the leader class version. Whilst not completely accurate, I thought it was definitely a very enjoyable figure and had some cool gimmicks as well, such as the chomping jaw and a rather simplistic transformation as well, which I think resulted in 2 modes which were fairly accurate to the film. Scorn here was slightly less accurate than I perhaps would have liked, but there was no denying that his Spinosaurus mode was a dead ringer for an actual real life dinosaur. However, in the film he did have 3 spikes, whereas the Deluxe only had 1. Of course, that was corrected when we get into the Last Night toy line, but personally for me, that was one of the best Deluxes to come out of the line, and the one that I found myself enjoying the most. I was actually quite surprised that we never got a Beast Wars Megatron retool out of that, as I think that that would have been a fantastic base to actually give us one from. But nevertheless, that never happened. But these are my top 4 picks for the Transformers Age of Extinction toy line. Turning now to my top 4 picks for the final Transformers Michael Bay movie, that being the Transformers The Last Night toy line. This too was quite a difficult line to pick 4 from, as there were so many good figures I believe to come out of the Transformers TLK line. However, for me, these were the 4 that stood out the most, as these were the ones that got me most anticipated for the line. Now I am using the Studio Series versions of both Nitro and Cogman, just as I have put the other 2 original versions into storage, and these 2 have got better paint apps than those, and I'm also using the more accurately painted Movie the Best version of Megatron, but the molds are exactly the same as their original counterparts. I know many of you might be quite surprised to see Berserker on the list, but when the Transformers The Last Night toy line was first announced, this was the figure that popped out to me the most. I was a massive fan of the Dark of the Moon Dreads, and I never thought that the original version of Crankcase that we got was that accurate to the film, so to see them actually revisiting that character's design and giving us a more accurate form in the form of Berserker, I was incredibly thrilled with, and this figure is so enjoyable, so fun to pose around, ball joints everywhere, hinge joints as well. Articulation for me was superb. I think the transformation's quite involved as well, allowing for a very enjoyable process from robot mode to vehicle mode, so definitely a very standout character from this line. Cogman, one of the few British Transformers to actually grace the silver screen. I loved Cogman's personality within the movie. Despite the figure being rather inaccurate, I think that it actually does embody what we see from Cogman's robot mode, despite it being made out of an actual vehicle. His Aston Martin DB11 form as well, I think, is a fitting vehicle mode to give him, as we do see him and Sir Anthony Hopkins actually driving around in that within the movie. And I think that his overall playability as well, where you can actually pop off his head and transform it into a small headmaster in order to give you a more accurate size, is really well done. The articulation's pretty nice as well as including the accessory of Excalibur. And then moving on to the KSI boss, or Nitro Zeus, I was once again a massive fan of Nitro in the movie. I thought he had a great personality, and this Voyager figure here actually overthrew Shockwave of being one of my favourite Decepticon Voyagers. So this was the Voyager DOTM Shockwave's rival, and still to this day he's one of my favourite Decepticon Voyagers. A really cool looking figure, very complex in his design as well as in his engineering, and he definitely harkens back to some of the Hunt for the Decepticons / Revenge of the Fallen figures in my opinion, just in terms of the level of detail, the scale that he's at, some of the features that he has, as well as the articulation. So definitely a really nice figure. And then the final figure that had to be on this list was of course the leader class version of Megatron from The Last Knight. I really did quite like his design in that movie, and out of him and the Voyager version, I think this one definitely captures his appearance a lot better. I think that the gimmick of actually flipping the mouth plate back from the shielded version to the open tusks is really cool, and I think his transformation too was pretty cool as well. He was probably one of the best leader figures that we had since the Dark of the Moon toy line. The ones from Age of Extinction were dreadful, and some of the figures that we got for this line, the Dragonstorm and the repainted Optimus, were also really bad figures. So this was definitely the standout for me, hence why Megatron is on this list and the Voyager isn't. So that wraps up everything for my Transformers The Last Knight movie toy line. Let's get in now to my final thoughts and conclusions. So there you have it. Those are my top 4 picks from each of the live action Transformers movie toy lines. This was a very difficult video to compile as there is just so many amazing movie figures. However, for me, the ones that I picked all stand out to me for either nostalgic reasons or just for the sense that they are amazing figures. I'd be really interested to know down in the comment section below which of the movie figures you think are the best to come out of all 5 of the live action Transformers movies, and which ones are your favourite due to your own personal nostalgic reasons. I really hope that you enjoyed this video and that it helped you to learn some of my own personal experience with collecting and how I actually got into the Transformers movies. If you wish for me to delve into a more in-depth video on that, I did very briefly cover it in this video, then once again, please let me know down in the comment section below. I really hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you don't agree with my picks, also be sure to let me know which ones you would have swapped out and replaced them with. And until my next video, I'll see you then. Thanks for watching.